Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. And we've got colleagues joining us from around the globe, which is very exciting for the Research and Distance Education Conference. So a warm welcome to our final day in our programme of 3 events. We've spent our first day looking at student experience and student engagement. Yesterday, we were looking at redesigning assessment. And today, quite rightly, we're focusing on rethinking learning and teaching. And I know that across the sector, across the globe, there has been a huge amount of rethinking. So I'm really pleased that we've got a programme today that allows us to engage in quite some detail in the sort of work that's going on internationally as well as within the UK. So I'm going to hand over now to Professor Stephen Brown, CDE Fellow and one of my great colleagues who's involved in the conference. Thanks very much, Stephen.
Thanks, Linda. You're too kind. I, however, am delighted to be introducing Neil Morris, our keynote speaker today. So Neil is, as you will have seen if you looked in the biographies on the conference website, he's Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Digital Transformation at the University of Leeds, where he leads initiatives to enhance blended, hybrid and online education and experience of students. And he provides lifelong and professional learning opportunities for learners globally. And he also holds the Chair of Educational Technologies, Innovation and Change at Leeds. He's also an active researcher in educational technology and online and blended learning. And he's published widely on the impact of blended learning, online learning and mobile technologies on student learning and engagement. He's a National Teaching Fellow and he's won many national awards for teaching excellence. So really, it's hard to think of someone better qualified to talk to us today about enhancing student learning and engagement through effective use of digital technologies and online learning. I'm delighted to welcome Neil. Over to you, Neil.
Thank you ever so much. That's a really kind introduction. Thank you. I really appreciate it, and especially from someone with such an esteemed background. I feel humbled to be in the company of such esteemed colleagues. So thank you for the invitation. Could we please share the slides, Andrew? Thank you. Great. Thank you very much. Well, welcome everybody to this event. It's a real pleasure to be here on the 3rd day, and the programme has been really magnificent, and there's been some fantastic conversations already. And as Linda said, the aim of today is to try to look forward, I guess, from what we've learned over the last year of COVID, and particularly what we know already from our research in digital education and online learning about how we're really going to support our students to learn most effectively through the use of digital technologies and online learning. And that's my brief, and it's what I'm going to hope to try and help support. Today, I'm giving a slightly different presentation. I'm conscious that I've given quite a lot of talks over the last 12 months, and I didn't want to kind of bore people. So I'm doing something that I'm not always very keen on in keynotes, is asking some questions and not really giving perhaps the answers. So we'll see how it goes. It's a different style for me. But I want to just kind of try and give a bit of background and contextualization of where I come from conceptually, and how I think COVID has really changed our perceptions of the way that digital technology can support students' education. I'm not sure there we go. Okay, so the plan for today is to have a think a little bit about the impact of COVID on our view of education, look a little to the future, and then reflect on our role as researchers and how this can really embed what we know already, what we will learn in the future, into business as usual for universities. And I just really do want to reflect on Andrew's introduction, because my journey has, I think, is interesting. I'm a teacher. I've taught on campus, face to face. I've taught online. I've tried to do research in this area, but I've also been a leader, and I'm now an executive leader. And I think that gives a really interesting perspective, having understood teaching, understood this from a research perspective, and I'm now trying to think, how do I help universities and my own colleagues to really learn from our educational experiences in our classrooms, on our Zooms, and the research that we've done? How do I really help to embed that change? So it's a very interesting position to occupy. So I don't make any apologies for briefly talking through this. I think it's really important for everybody who works in this space to position themselves. It's very easy to be considered very technocentric, and I think it's incredibly important for me to position myself as absolutely learning and learner-centered. Everything that I've done and the research that I conduct and the research that I follow and believe in is all about the impact that digital technologies and online education can have to support learning. I'm not particularly interested in the technology itself. I'm interested in the way that we can harness the power of that technology to support students' learning. And prior to COVID, we were really amassing a very strong evidence base about the value of use of digital technologies and online learning to support students' learning. And my mantra over the last 5 to 10 years has really become sharpened about the value of digital and online to support access to higher education and to education generally, to increase flexibility, to enable more learners, more students to engage productively with education, and to support inclusivity, because I genuinely don't think that you can provide an inclusive learning experience for students without the use of digital technologies and online learning. So I've really focused about how I genuinely believe, and I think the evidence proves it, that digital technology and online learning can support access, flexibility, and inclusivity, alongside many other things. And I think it's right to say that actually effective use of digital technology can improve engagement, motivation, and enjoyment. And that is a key determinant of success for students' learning. It's good to have fun. It's important to have fun. Fun in learning really does enhance learning outcomes. So this I don't think this has changed as a result of COVID. I think many people are starting to realize this. And for many of us who have worked in this area for a long time, it's a little bit, we have to take a deep breath and just say it all again, because actually people are now listening in a way that they weren't before COVID. We may have known this, but we need to keep repeating it because many colleagues are really now listening. This is also something, this slide is also a pre-COVID slide. And I think it's something that we've all really known, that whilst there are significant potential advantages of using digital technology, there are very widespread understood challenges that it presents, particularly in terms of equality of access, the potential for exclusion, and as I mentioned earlier, a real risk of a technocentric focus as we start to deploy digital technologies, and a real risk of not being able to harness technologies to their true potential because of a lack of digital literacy. And again, these have all been proven and exemplified over the last 12 years throughout the whole education system, not just higher education, and right across the globe. And I think we've got a really important responsibility, and as was talked about earlier in the week, we've got a really important responsibility to work hard not to widen the gap. Reducing inequality is a very significant challenge that no single organisation can take on or solve, but we've all got the opportunity and responsibility to make sure that we're not contributing to widening the gap when we're using digital technology to support learning. And just to exemplify that, some of you will have heard of the GISC Digital Student Experience Survey, which is a UK-based survey. They ran it, we ran it, a number of universities have run it as a pulse survey during this last academic session to help us understand students' experiences whilst they've been studying in emergency online mode. And you can see just here that the real impact on inequality through lack of access to digital technology and internet. 62%, and this is national data, having problems learning online through poor access to the internet and through lack of access to devices. You can also see a real challenge from students about perceived quality. So 68% of students basically considering the experience to be above average, which is not a kind of an experience satisfaction score that any of us as educators would really strive to. And this is actually really similar at Leeds. So despite all of the work that we've put in over the years to really try and embed digital technology and online learning, both within our staff and our infrastructure and supporting students, everybody found it incredibly challenging to have what is perceived to be a high quality experience. And I think this is a really sanguine lesson for us all to think very, very hard about what we need to learn about what makes a good online learning experience. So this is where we've got to start to think hard now. This is our challenge, not just for universities, but for the whole education sector. What are we going to do to make sure that we embed digital technology and online learning effectively, pedagogically, appropriately, and in a supportive, community-based way to ensure that it adds value, that it genuinely does increase access, that it supports flexibility, and that it provides an inclusive experience. And this is a challenge for every university to be thinking through for now, forevermore. And I guess these are the 5 things that I've tried to encourage Leeds to think about. I think we've really got to think differently about what we mean by student. The world is now our oyster in terms of supporting education, and we really need to think much more broadly about who we are here to support, who are the learners that can benefit from an education that we can offer, and most importantly, how are we going to design and deliver an educational experience that supports students who are not our typical student that might come to us on campus. I think we also need to take this opportunity to really think hard and differently about the type of curricula that we offer, and very importantly about the pedagogical approaches that we offer our students. It's really important that people now really start to understand what we mean by blended learning and how it needs to be an active engagement and interactive experience for our students, which is group-based, community-based, and really, really enriched by the use of digital technologies. I know you've had a whole day talking about assessment, but this for me is one of the things that is absolutely critical that we now think. How are we going to really reimagine assessment around authenticity, around supporting students to develop work-ready skills, about using technology to really help students to gain not just knowledge, but competencies and behaviours and skills that will really support them in their future activities. I see reimagining assessment as a massive opportunity for us as a sector. I know, again, you've talked a lot about digital inequality, so I won't really repeat the messages that have been really well delivered. I think it's about working hard to reduce them and absolutely focusing on making sure we don't reinforce them, that we don't create inequality by the work that we do online. And finally, really ensuring that we absolutely ensure that both our students and our staff have got the literacies that they need to be able to navigate the technologies that are available to us, to make sure that they're embedded pedagogically appropriately in a way that includes all of our learners and provides the flexibility that they deserve in the kind of educational experience that we're perfectly capable of offering. This kind of manifests itself, in my experience, in kind of 4 areas. I'm not really going to speak about these today, but the 4 areas of learning experience, learning spaces, learning content, and learning technology are really rich, ripe areas where a huge amount of research has been done, a lot of practice has been done, there's huge amounts of innovation across the sector. And I think each of those areas need to be examined deeply through those 5 lenses that I've just talked through. And that's certainly what's happening at Leeds at the moment, to think, how are we really going to make sure we make the best use of digital technology and online learning to support everybody who engages with us, be they an undergraduate student learning on campus, a master's student learning online, a professional learner who's doing CPD with us, or a lifelong learner who's enriching their learning experiences. Whoever they are, how are we going to provide them the best experience? So I think there are a number of implications for universities to really think through as a result of COVID. The first is, and it's probably blindingly obvious to say this, but use of digital and online learning has now become core business for our universities, and that is a shift. It is accepted by every executive leader I've spoken to in the last month, 12 months. This is now core business. This needs to be something that we understand, that we invest in, that we make use of, and that we properly embed into everything we do. And that is a huge opportunity for everybody who's been working in this area. We mustn't lose that opportunity. The second thing that I think is really important is that language and terminology is critical. I think we're in a really difficult place at the moment with language and terminology in this space. To give an example, at Leeds, we're confusing ourselves with use of phrases like blended and hybrid and multi-mode, and we're confusing our students, we're confusing our staff, because we haven't got kind of clear nomenclature about what blended means, about what is a hybrid experience. And I just think we as a sector, the experience that we have in this space is really rich and long-standing, and we should be leading, this community should be leading and helping colleagues to really think what these terms mean and how they can really be applied in practice. The third thing I think really just brings it together, that we do have the experience in the research and practice from everything that people in this community have been doing for many years. The research in distance education is really world leading, and it needs to now be applied. It can be really usefully used to help universities to make this transition where they embed digital and online learning into their core business. And so I would just encourage everybody who's working in this space to bring your research to the forefront, to talk to people about its practical implications. And I think the next thing is that our future research really needs to focus. It needs to focus on the fact that this shift has happened, that this is now core business. It's now something that needs to be applied into the way that universities operate. Is going to change forever the way that universities think about education, and our research. The research opportunities are huge, but the research needs to have impact, and the impact is in our universities and our colleges. It's no longer abstract or theoretical. It's absolutely got to be applied to the practice that happens every single day in our universities. And finally, one of the biggest challenges that we've probably all faced with colleagues is the evidence. Providing the evidence base of the efficacy and the effectiveness of use of online and digital education is absolutely critical to really make this embedded, to make it part of core business. We've got to do the really rich, robust, quantitative and qualitative research that demonstrates the effectiveness and efficacy of digital technology. So those are my kind of 5 suggestions, I think, for the community about how we really make an opportunity out of what we've done in the past. I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes reflecting on where we are at Leeds. And as you'll have noticed from my job title, we've created digital transformation as a whole pillar of university work. And digital transformation as a phrase is a contested phrase in its own right, as I've just said about blended and hybrid, but we've basically adopted the Brown definition, where we really want to think very hard about digital transformation being a culture shift for our organization, to the point that it will really change the way the university operates fundamentally in terms of how we think, the kind of business that we do, the kind of offer that we make to our students. And that's really genuinely transformational. I know people struggle with the phrase transformation, but it is genuinely transformational for a university to think how is digital going to shift us as an organization, as a learning organization. So that kind of sets the scene, and we've created a digital transformation strategy which is overarching. So it is not just in the education space, but it's also about our research activity and the way that the business operates, our campus infrastructure, our business operations. So we've brought together all three strands of the university and said that we are going to think really hard about how digital technology and digital approaches can really enrich everything we're doing. And at the base of that strategy is the absolute underpinning is thinking about our culture and our people, because we recognize that this is about cultural change. This is not about technology change. And crucially, it's about the interaction of our education, our research activities, because digital is a really strong opportunity for us to bring those two things together, to feed off each other, to enrich each other, so that we can have the maximum impact that we can as a university, and genuinely we can change the world through effective use of digital technology when we really understand the value it can have and we can manage the limitations that it poses. So that's a little bit of context on digital transformation. As I promised I was going to stop with 3 questions. So I've kind of introduced most of these already, but these are the things that I'm thinking about a lot at the moment. There's a lot of discussion about active learning as people move back into a campus environment, and I think the evidence is absolutely overwhelming. The slides on the right are the slides I give in a kind of practice-based talk where I'm sharing the evidence and trying to convince people to change. In this talk, I want to say, I don't think it's working. I think the evidence is there. I think the practice and innovation is compelling, but I think there is huge resistance, both from staff and students, actually. And my question to this community is, how can we shift this resistance, and how can we use the research that we've done in the past in distance education, which is hugely effective, and we know this practice works, but how can we use what we've done to really shift the thinking, the mindset in our communities? And I emphasize staff and students here. This is not just a staff resistance issue. Students are resistant to the idea of active learning in our university. So that's my first question. My second question is about data. And it's absolutely evident that our educational practice is going to shift dramatically as a result of effective use of our data to inform decisions, and that decision making from our data will increasingly be machine learning based. There's already a huge amount of evidence in the literature about the value of learning analytics, particularly, and the role that data can play to support students' outcomes, to improve their experience, to enable them to become self-regulated learners, and indeed to improve overall curricula, to shape and shift the way we teach and assess using data that we have. But there's very significant resistance, again, within the staff and student communities about legitimate issues of data protection, privacy, the lack of efficacy, and the consequences that may arise from use of data. I think these can be overcome, but I am still feeling and seeing huge resistance in the sector to this move towards effective data-informed decision-making. And I know that research on online learning and distance education has got a huge amount to offer in terms of the practice that we've all seen through learning about our online learners, through data insights. And then my question is, how can we use that research and that practice to help embed learning analytics for all students on campus and indeed online? And my last question, you'll be pleased to know, is in the area of online learning. Again, if you followed my work, this is a very significant piece of my interest. So we've done a big project around the future of online education. It was what I spoke at RIDE 2020 about, where we were talking about the project of unbundling. And of course, this year, there's a huge amount of unbundling. There's massive growth of online learning. There's loads of partnerships being developed with universities and online learning companies, and everybody's now talking about micro-credentials and stackable provision. But we as a community know so much about this. How can we make sure people don't make mistakes? Because I'm seeing mistakes being made. I can see people thinking they're going to reinvent the wheel. I can see universities getting into distance education without any experience, without understanding how to create effective online education. I think this community's got a huge role to play to make sure that we build on our experiences and we don't start from scratch. There's no need, I don't think, to make the same mistakes that we've been making for 20 years. So how can we use the research we've done to make sure that online provision is created effectively? And how can we make sure that COVID is an opportunity to enable us to innovate in distance education so that we can genuinely support lifelong learning and offer education for all? And with that, I will stop if I can get my summary slide. So yes, just to say, I think it's obvious that COVID has produced a permanent shift in our view of digital online education. The research that we've done and the research that we will do will be critical to embed this effectively in our core businesses for the future. And there are going to be very significant changes as a result of digital online learning, both for campus-based and online education. And that will all need research and impactful research. And of course, we must remember to remain human-centered and learning focused and make sure that we are critically evaluating new technologies. And with that, I will stop. I'm very, very happy and excited to hear your thoughts and answer your questions. But for now, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Neil. I'm sure if we were in a conventional lecture theatre, there would now be a storm of applause for a really terrific presentation. I think terrific because not only was it thoughtful and informed, but it was also very frank. And I think that's absolutely spot on because I agree with you. I think despite everything that's happened over the last year, there is still a degree of resistance out there, and I'm not quite sure why that is and quite what's going on, but we definitely do need to address it. So I'm very grateful that you've raised that issue. I'm going to respond a little bit more to your presentation, but before I do, can I just remind people that we've got the opportunity to ask Neil questions using the Q&A button, which is at the bottom of your screen. So if you click on Q&A, you can then type a question in there. We've already got a stack of questions, but don't miss this opportunity. So, Neil, I think you've summarized the pros and the cons of digital technology in relation to learning and teaching really very well. I mean, the pros that you've touched on, supporting access, increasing flexibility, enhancing inclusivity, and also the potential to increase motivation and engagement, and so on. So lots of pros, and also, as I said, you've been very frank. You've described, I think, quite clearly some of the downsides to technology, and I love the term techno stress. If you don't mind, I might borrow that and use that elsewhere. And I think also by drawing our attention to the results of the JISC Student Digital Learning Experiences Survey, you've painted quite a powerful picture of the experiences of learners during the post-pandemic shift to online learning. We've got a good feel there of how it appears to them. So far so good, and the 5 challenges that you described for digitally enhanced education that you described, it seemed to me to be very logical extensions of those issues. But as I think you yourself acknowledged, with a brief reference to things happening at Leeds, as well as what the evidence from the JISC survey shows us, and other surveys as well, some of these things are a lot easier said than done. Of course they are, especially as some of them have roots in fundamental aspects of society. For example, we all understand that we've got to remove digital inequalities, and yet that goes way beyond, or at least it seems to me, way beyond the remit of any individual institution or even the higher education system as a whole. That's a societal inequality that's going to need a more fundamental approach, perhaps. So we can contribute, but as Ellen Helsper referred to in her keynote on day one, this is a big issue that goes beyond what we as individuals perhaps can tackle. You note that one of the challenges is that staff and students appear to be resistant to active learning, and you've asked how research can overcome this resistance. And it seemed to me that in a rational world, that would be a necessary and possibly even on its own sufficient response to this challenge. But applying the research, what do we know? Let's use it. But as you observed, digital transformation also depends on attitudes and culture, and I thought it was really good that you with that slide you showed with people and culture at the bottom as the foundations on which we need to build our responses. And certainly in my experience, getting that degree of coordination and depth to ensure meaningful and lasting change is itself a major challenge. There have been so many institutional-wide initiatives that have come and gone, and culture is not easily shifted by logic and facts alone. It's people and organisations are political and they're emotional, and at times they're a bit irrational, and so it's necessary to look at how we might win the hearts as well as the minds. I would suggest, and I suspect that you have something to say about this. We do know that attempts to change organizational culture through top-down or bottom-up approaches are not generally terribly successful, because without exceptional leadership and the favorable circumstances, top-down tends to generate active and or passive resistance, and bottom-up encounters conflict between competing ideas. Maybe there's a middle ground, some kind of participatory or collaborative approach that would involve wider engagement of members of the organization in defining the problem as well as generating the solutions. Perhaps that offers more potential, but again, it's not without difficulty, because that sort of approach can certainly take much longer and could lead to outcomes not yet anticipated and possibly not even desired by those in charge of the organization. So I'm sharing these thoughts because I don't have the answer, but I think it's a really important conversation. And I'm not looking to you necessarily for a response. I'm really interested in what people, other participants in this this conference have to say about these issues. So I'd like to stop there and invite members of the conference to, if they can, contribute their thoughts on these issues or other issues that you've raised, hopefully with successful examples and some key principles that we can draw upon. We also have, as I said earlier, a stack of questions to go through, but let me stop there, and we'll give people a minute or two to think while we look at some of the questions that have come in. So again, thank you, Neil.
Well, let me just say thank you to you, Stephen. I think that's an incredibly thoughtful and insightful response to a perhaps slightly incoherent set of thoughts from my perspective. So yeah, I think you've raised some really important points, and yeah, we could talk for hours.
We could. Unfortunately, there won't be time. I'd like to start with a question, which is, do you think the move away from an emergency response to campus closure to a really thoughtful reform of technology-supported learning and teaching is actually underway? This is from Alan Tate.
Yeah, well, let me continue with the kind of frank responses, because I think they're probably the most helpful. I think people want to do that, but I genuinely think people are too exhausted to actually have the headspace to engage with it. So I think there is a will and an understanding that it's necessary, but a genuine lack of time and headspace to be able to engage with it. So I think it's actually going to take the sector probably 2 to 3 years to really properly feel like it's engaging with the impact of this and starting to think coherently about how to embed effectively.
I wonder if that's related to the resistance that you've noted, you've commented on, and I noticed that a number of the questions here are about resistance. Iona Silver Fletcher, for example, has asked, is active learning resisted because learner behaviours have changed? And do we understand enough about these changes?
Yeah, I think that there's a real discussion to be had about what's a bit, well, from a UK perspective, I can only really speak about that, but the transition from school to a university environment, I think we've got to understand much better what's happening in our schools, and so that we can understand how to support students if we're going to adapt the way that they engage with us in the university environment. That I often feel that that's the resistance from students, is that shift in teaching and learning approach is what they struggle with, and particularly they struggle with active learning when it's done in isolation. So if one of their lecturers has decided to change the approach and everybody else is using a traditional, let's say, form, that's very jarring for students. They find it very difficult to navigate multiple pedagogical approaches simultaneously. So I think I'd say, yeah, 2 things. One, we need to understand the schooling, teaching and learning, and how to prepare students for an education, and making sure that we, if we're going to do active learning, that we embed it holistically and really support students to be able to engage with it.
I think you kind of answered the next question that's coming up, but let me pose it anyway, because it focuses more on staff than students. But it's a comment really from David Bohm, suggesting that one reason for resistance to active learning may be that it's hard work. Another may be that it challenges the long-established knowledge transmission paradigm. And a third may be that we still often assess knowledge, and all of this makes active learning a tough sell.
Yeah, I can't argue with any of that. I completely agree. I think those are 3 really, valid reasons why there is the resistance.
Yeah, I think I agree too. Yeah, there's a question here from Ikenadichi Ogamba, who says, thanks for the very useful presentation, Neil. And are the challenges of fostering a sense of belonging among students in online learning, is this a widespread issue? And could you share any lessons or ideas on this, please?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting question, because we have got a lot of experience of supporting community and sense of belonging within traditional online distance learning. So, small group, fully online programs that many of us have been involved with for years, and also creating community in very large online courses, the MOOCs of the world, and the large courses that many of us are also delivering. So I think there are lots of practitioners who do understand some of the tricks and techniques by which you can create community in an online environment. And our struggle over the last 12 months is to translate that knowledge and to get it into the hands of everybody who suddenly had to do it. So I think this is one of the things behind my whole presentation, is I do think we have some of the answers from our previous experience, but we've not yet managed to translate them in a way that people have been able to pick them up and use them effectively. So I think it's possible to create really strong online community. I don't think we're doing it yet across the board.
That's interesting. There's a question from Kalina Zalatkova, who is suggesting that perhaps industrial entities may be further ahead than us on this. The question is, considering the practical application of a blended experiential delivery to students, from the careers and employability perspective across University of London, our industrial partners are very much further ahead in their approach to the delivery of work experience in a digital environment than our academic stakeholders are. And she asks, what has been Leeds' approach to this issue? Or would you have any advice on how we can bridge that gap?
Yeah, that's very interesting, isn't it? Because traditionally people would say that industrial online education is still in the kind of e-learning mode, and has kind of struggled to catch up. But I guess perhaps the answer might be in that industry is generally very quick to change, because the organizational structures and cultures are very different to universities. So they may have leapfrogged us, and that's certainly a risk that we've been posing through our unbundled university research activities, because many people have raised the concern that actually industry may become very good at generating very high quality online learning experiences, to the point that learners may think, I don't actually need a degree, I need to take industry-led, industry accredited training. And actually, if it's very high quality and it can get me a job, I think we've all got to start wondering and perhaps worrying about the future of degrees. And that's not to be too provocative, because I don't see it as happening wholesale, but I certainly see it happening to some extent. And I think the universities have got to work with industry, develop partnerships, collaborate more, and accept that we've got to be able to change more rapidly.
Following on from that, actually, Stylianos Hatsipanagos has asked, do you think that having stackable offerings by MOOC providers and by others has value pedagogically and in terms of the student journey towards a degree? Stackable offerings was talked about by Ellen on day one.
Yeah, again, so from our research perspective, we absolutely identified advantages but very significant drawbacks to stackable routes. So from a student perspective, it can look a very attractive proposition. So pay as you learn when you like, choose from a platter of courses from leading providers all over the world, put them together in any which way you like, and offer them to an employer. That will look like a very attractive proposition to a learner. If you just think about that from the other side, that's a potentially really incoherent curriculum with no horizontal and vertical scaffolding. It's potentially a genuinely poor experience if the courses that have been taken have not been quality assured, have not been aligned with the kind of overall outcomes. And it's potentially a really poorly supported experience if there's no holistic support for the learner. So a lot of what happens in our universities is the glue that ties together the individual modules and the courses into a holistic learning experience. And if that is lost, I fear there's very serious risks. So yeah, I don't think anyone's going to be saying very soon that a completely unbundled experience is going to go well for many learners. I think some learners will be able to navigate it well, but most will find it incredibly challenging. And it's one of the things that I think is a huge risk in terms of inequality. I think that unstackable credentials could create a two-tier system that some students can navigate, but many won't be able to.
Thank you. I think we've got time for just one more question. So I'm going to turn to Gwyneth Hughes, who has asked, do you think, could there be a link between student resistance to active learning and rethinking assessment design? For example, assessment that is mainly based on replicating knowledge is likely to encourage a culture with a more passive approach to learning.
Yeah, I agree entirely, Gwyneth. They're absolutely linked together. And I think your use of the word passive is absolutely key here. So passive learning and passive assessment are the easiest routes through for all of us. But ease doesn't translate into effectiveness. So that's one of our big challenges, is to support students. And it's what I say to my kids day in, day out. Learning is hard. It should feel tiring. You should feel tired. And that's the evidence that your brain has actually put in work. It's used energy. If you are just receiving information, you will walk away from a lecture feeling very much untouched. But if you've been in an active learning session, either as a teacher or a student, you will feel tired. And I kind of use that as a proxy of work done, brain changed. How about that as a summary?
That's a tremendous point at which to end, Neil. I personally shall be leaving this session feeling touched, but I don't feel that tired. I feel inspired. I think you, as I said at the beginning, you've been frank about the challenges that we face, but I think you've presented us with what I find a reasonably optimistic picture about the way forward. Okay, it is going to be hard, but it's going to be worthwhile, and I think we've got a handle on it. So thank you very much indeed. Uproarious applause once more from the auditorium. Thank you. And thank you to everybody who's posted so many great questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to answer all of them. If Neil has time, he may be able to
answer some now. Yeah.
Look in the chat or respond via the Q&A. Thank you very much, Neil. So we turn now to this year's Roger Mills Prize for Innovation in Learning and Teaching. And at the start of the conference, Professor Mary Stiasny announced the results of the award, which is made by the University of London in the name of one of the early members of the Centre for Distance Education, Dr. Roger Mills, who was a respected and much loved colleague. The awards panel considered 4 strong nominations, which meant that it was a challenge to select just one winning project against the award criteria of innovation, value, impact, and transferability. Although the panel found much to recommend in the projects submitted from Royal Holloway, University of London, Queen Mary, University London, and University College London, one project clearly stood out, and that was the development of the digital skills awareness courses led by Sarah Sherman and Nancy Weitz for the Bloomsbury Learning Exchange. What's well, in our sessions at the conference this week, we have returned again and again to the question of digital skills. The promotion and support of digital skills for academics and university professionals, as well as for students, is central at this pivotal point in the move to blended and technology-supported learning. And what's remarkable about the winning project are the ways in which transferability and impact were built into it right from the start as a shareable open education resource. The success of this approach and its value to the sector as a whole has been confirmed by the significant number of OER licenses issued by the Bloomsbury Learning Exchange to other institutions to enable them to use and adapt the digital skills awareness courses for their own purposes. So our congratulations to CDE fellow Sarah Sherman and to Nancy Weitz and the Bloomsbury Learning Exchange for winning the 2021 Roger Mills Award for Innovation in Learning and Teaching. And I have great pleasure now in inviting Nancy and Sarah to provide some insights into their work on raising digital skills for staff and students.
Thank you so much, Stephen. You've kind of done half of our job for us. That's brilliant. I am delighted and so honoured, as is Nancy as well, who's joined me online to accept this award, and even more honoured that I got to work with the wonderful Roger many years ago on a project. So in his name, I'm delighted. So I am going to tell you very, very briefly what the BLEE is, what the Bloomsbury Learning Exchange is, to tell you about our approach to developing the digital skills courses for students and for staff, and then to tell you how you can get your own copy. As I said, my colleague Nancy is also here online and she is ready to chip in, butt in, correct me, Nancy, at any point, but let's go on. So the Bloomsbury Learning Exchange is a shared centre. We work for 6 universities. You can see at the bottom of the screen: Birkbeck, the London School of Hygiene, Tropical Medicine, SOAS, UCL, the Royal Veterinary College, and the University of London itself. And we work across a department, we work for staff, we support staff in supporting students, and we provide a number of resources and activities. We bring people together, we facilitate the exchange of knowledge and the sharing of practice. Find out more about what we have done and how we've worked with our staff later on this afternoon in our session that I'm running with my colleague Julian. Bit of a plug there. So our approach, our winning approach, was to develop some courses for staff, for incoming staff, incoming students, to kind of let them know headline information about what to expect in their work and their learning in terms of the digital. We wanted them to hit the ground running. We wanted to provide the support to the institutions that we work for. So we created what we call a blueprint course. So it was a very vanilla, very sort of plain version of the course, which Nancy and I developed. Then we handed to our partner institutions so they could adapt, personalize, customize various points of the course, which would then be suitable for their context. Once we had had some great feedback from our institutions, we thought, why not share this with the rest of the world? So our courses are now out there, ready for anyone who wants to adapt them for their own institutional context. So how we did this, how we put these, sorry, Nancy.
Right there, I was just going to break it and just make the point that one of the challenges was to resist the urge to make it sexy, and instead make sure that we had something that was really very generic and very widely useful. And that in itself is an interesting challenge. But carry on.
Thank you. So in order to design and create these courses, we did some research, as all good practitioners would. So we looked at our landscape, we talked to staff who interface with students, we talked to professional services staff who liaise with students and teaching staff to get an idea of what needed to go into both of these courses. Once we had established that, we'd had sort of one-to-one conversations. We also conducted surveys with staff, with students, about the sorts of things that they wished they had known before they started on their courses, or we talked to staff about what they wished they had known before they started in their roles. And with all of this content, all of this data that we collected, we started to define the structure and the topics and the content that would go into the courses. So we took data from the surveys, and then we scoped our landscape and we looked at the kind of resources and content we could put into these courses, whether these were things that we had developed internally across our 6 partner institutions, or more widely in the sort of the OER world of people releasing content openly. We looked to see what we could reuse and repurpose to really get going and speed along. So from all of this, we started to create course maps. So there is a sort of an underlying spreadsheet that accompanies our course, which identifies all of the different bits of content that we've put in the course, but more importantly, identifies to any institution that wanted to take a copy of the course where they needed to make local changes. So links to IT support, links to library resources, anything that makes the course their own into their context. So in terms of students, I'm going to attempt to play a video which hopefully will give you an idea of what this course is and how you might want to use it.
These days, students entering higher education need to know how to do more than show up at lectures, write notes by hand, read books in the library, and sit exams with a pencil.
Digital technologies are now an integral part of learning, and without the basic skills to use technologies to access their learning, students enter university at a disadvantage.
The BLE is doing something about this. Our Digital Skills Awareness course outlines the key digital skills students need for their studies, whether it's understanding how to manage files, using an online learning environment, keeping safe online, or finding tools for taking notes.
The course won't teach students the digital skills. It's for avoiding surprises that make them think, "No one told me I needed to know that." Institutional support services through the library and IT are there to help students to acquire or improve their skills. This course offers tips and advice from a variety of sources, including university support staff and other students, as well as helpful links and videos from around the internet.
We're making the course freely available for HE institutions in the UK in the spirit of sharing open educational resources. If you're interested in adopting the course to run locally at your institution, you can view the demo and request a copy.
The original version, which you will receive as a zip file, is a generic Moodle course ready to be installed on your own servers.
The course is licensed under Creative Commons. You are welcome to modify it to fit your local needs. Also, you can join our community of adopters, helping to shape and improve the course for the benefit of students across the UK.
For more information and access to the demo version, please visit our website.
Ooh, let's not watch that again. Okay, so the basic structure of this course, as we say, it's very much an overview. It's not about teaching really in-depth skills, but for the full topics in the student version, we looked at general technologies, Microsoft applications, search engines. We looked at learning technologies, specifically the learning environment, the platforms that students will start to use. We talk about access, sharing, safety, how to be safe and comfortable in the internet, and getting organised, note-taking, referencing, that kind of stuff. So those were our four very open structures, but obviously an adopting university can add to that, take things away, make it their own. What was happening right now with this course is that we have had interest from Futurelearn, so we're adapting our course to the Futurelearn platform so that there will be a MOOC, and this will be hopefully available at the start of the academic year. We're restructuring the 4 topics into 3 weeks of the MOOC, and we're creating more and up-to-date content, obviously to cover the current way of learning. I'm not going to go read through these slides, but just to say that in terms of high-level stats, we've had over 160 requests of people wanting just to access the demo version. We have submitted 50 licenses, a few extras since I put in the proposal, and we've had some really fantastic responses and feedback on our community of adopters mailing list. I'm going to now hand over to ourselves again with another even shorter video, which introduces the teaching version of the course. This is also the welcome video in the course. That was just the opening video of the teaching version of the course, and the structure is sort of similar to the student one. We talk about policy, so the legal requirements that teaching staff need to know about, general technologies, again, the Microsoft products, the non-learning environment stuff, then the kind of the institutional teaching and learning tools, and then we talk a little bit more about pedagogy. So again, very an overview and open for universities to adapt and put in other content. There isn't time for us to go into any detail to show you the actual courses, but you were welcome to request a demo version of it. But this is just a screenshot of the very first topic of the teaching version, which is about policy. And this is it. This is all that there is on that first page. We talk about accessibility, GDPR and IP. And at the end of each unit, there's a very simple quiz. So the course also models a good online course. So we have much fewer stats on the teaching version, but that's because we only released it a month ago. So it was 21st of May. That was when it was released to the world. So we're very early days, but this is why we're delighted that we were able to present today and see if there's any more interest in our teacher version. So as we said, both courses, there's the focus, as Nancy said, on awareness rather than immediate skills acquisition. I've talked about the demo versions, which you're welcome to request. And then once you like what you see, you can request an actual copy. We send you a Moodle course. If you don't have Moodle at your institution, there are ways to to put them into your environment, or you can copy and paste, but they are openly shared through Creative Commons. We just hope that we expect an acknowledgement of where you got the content. And as I said, both courses have a community of practice behind them. So there's the link there. If you fill in, if you go to the ble.ac.uk/contact, that's our contact form where you can put in your name, your institution, and tell us which course, if not both, you would like to have. And more information about our courses are on that bottom URL. And that's it. I've rushed through that, but again, thank you to the University of London, to CDE for allowing us to win the wonderful prize.
Yes, thank you. Do we have time to take a couple of questions? If so, we're happy to do so.
I'm not sure that we do, unfortunately, Nancy, because we have sort of reached the end, but I noticed that there were a couple of questions about whether it's available internationally, and you've kindly responded there by asking people to contact you. So that's brilliant. What I'd like to do is very much thank the presenters this morning. Sarah, if you could take the slides down, it'd be great. I'm looking at the big hands.
Sorry.
It's okay.
How do I do it?
Stop
share.
Thank you very much to everybody who's contributed this morning. Well done, Nancy and Sarah and the BLEE for really, really deserving to win such a prestigious prize. So well done. Neil and Stephen, a fantastically stimulating session. David on day one coined the phrase that his brain was fizzing. My brain has continued to fizz all the way through the week, and definitely fizzing this morning. I hope everybody else is. We're going to take a little break to give ourselves a chance to water those fizzing brains, and we come back then to 2 lots of parallel sessions. So we've got parallel sessions between 10:45 and 11:45, and then a second set of parallel sessions between 12 and 1. So it's a big morning. We don't meet back together again as a whole team, as a whole audience for a plenary. We end now with our parallel sessions. What we'll do, if we may, is we'll share a link in the parallel sessions to an evaluation. We would very much welcome your feedback and your comments on the 3 days of the RIDE conference. It's a bit of a weird experience doing these conferences in this way. We very much look forward to next year being able to have a hybrid, blended, I'm not quite sure what the right term is, Neil, experience where people are in the building with us and as well as online. But it's been fantastic to have such an international audience here with us as well. Thank you very much to everybody this morning. We'll end this now to give everybody a little break, and we'll see you later on in our parallel sessions. Thank you.